Welcome back, everyone. Well, let's face it, some ears are sharper than others. You knew I was going to do that, didn't you?
Yeah, that's a nice entree, isn't it?
You hear me say it a lot, but I'm always stunned by all the talented people in the North Country. And lo and behold, you might recall we did a story, just a brief story earlier, I think it was last week, about a composer living in Queensbury, Neil Tatar. And I kept thinking to myself, this can't be the Neil Tatar that I first met 30 years ago. And sure enough, it is. And the reference to some ears are sharper than others. Neil owned a audio store in Queensbury for many years, about 30 years ago. And my partner and I had done a campaign entitled Some Ears Are Sharper Than Others. So there you go. So welcome back.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be back. And that was a great campaign, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you. So, Neil, we got wind that all of a sudden Neil Tatar in Queensbury was a composer working with some world-renowned musicians, starting to gain acclaim at the level of like being considered for the Grammy ballot, and that's you. I don't even know where to start, except if we're going to try to cover 30 years, we're in trouble. Right. Just tell me, when we met, you were always very involved with audio. You're very intrigued by it. I knew you were a musician. And then you said along about the year 2000, you started to explore getting back into composing and getting back into music, correct?
That's correct. I had played guitar in Boston for a number of years. And then moving back to upstate New York and having the audio business, I was playing less and less. I did decide around the year 2000 that I was getting on, and if I was ever going to start to go back to my music and playing, that it was going to be now. Mm-hmm. So I took advantage of the opportunity, and I started to do some more playing and got into some writing and composing from a more improvisational standpoint.
Yes, right. Now, let's just explain a little bit. When you say improvisational playing, if you're a jazz aficionado, you go right to people like Miles Davis. You can go to a lot of them. You can go to John Cage. You can go to a lot of different places when you talk about improvisation. But you were kind of finely tuned about your exploration of improvisation, right? You met David Darling.
Correct. Yes, I did.
Now tell us who David is.
David Darling is a wonderfully talented cellist and composer. For years he played with the Paul Winter Consort, and I met David through an organization called Music for People, which he had founded in the 1980s, and it deals with a humanistic approach to music improvisation. Basically, that's what it does. And they have workshops around the Northeast, and I started to attend those sessions.
Right. Now, all musicians would tell you, all artists will tell you that they derive inspiration from any number of things. You told me a story before we went on air about your mom.
Yeah. I was talking with my mother, who had relocated from upstate New York to California in their retirement, and my dad was in late stages of life, and we would process her life and their situation on the telephone. And after these phone conversations, I would go to the piano and I would process and also do the grieving on the piano, where the right hand would be my mother's voice and the left hand would be my voice on these telephone conversations. And once she was reflecting on her life in upstate New York, and she asked the question, where did the time go?
Yes.
Which struck me at a very personal level. She was looking at her life and her past, yet she was also reflecting on my life and my upbringing as a child for all of those years. And that ultimately struck a chord and became the title track for the first album.
Now, you played some of the pieces for David. Obviously, he was very impressed and invited you to go in the studio, and also asked if he could play cello on your pieces. Well, that's quite an honor.
That was a great honor. That was a very nice surprise. And the first album is predominantly a duet album, just of the two of us, mostly cello with David, and guitar and piano that I would add. And
that you added,
we would share in the composing, bringing our own work in, and also collaborating on a few pieces as well.
Now, that led you to I suppose, we're always looking as musicians and artists, we always want the confidence. It's self-esteem is always an issue with anybody that's creative, doubting your own talent and all these things. So with that kind of reinforcement, emotionally and spiritually and every other way, considering the kind of music you play, you started to gain momentum. In what way?
Well, the more that you do something, the better you get at it.
Yes.
So the more that I was writing and the more that I was composing, the more comfortable I became with identifying my own unique sound and taking that sound and translating it into my composing. So that gave me the confidence to continue to do it.
Now, David mentioned Will Ackerman.
Correct.
Another very, very talented musician. And you had a phone conversation with Will, and he invited you to come into the studio and asked if he could play on some things.
Yeah, Will and I...
Neil, what's going on here?
Well, we hit it off from the start, and I had always admired Will both as the founder of Windham Hill,
Yes, sure.
which had some fabulous albums in the 70s and 80s and into the early 90s, and I also respected him quite a bit as a guitarist. So just the opportunity to get together and meet with him was great, but then when it moved into setting up a recording session, that was really special too.
Sure. Now, in that recording session, by the way, in case you want to know, musicians at the caliber of a Tony Levin appear on the album. And those of you who are old enough would remember King Crimson, for which he played bass in, but more recently, of course, very, very influential player on a number of Peter Gabriel recordings and also some David Bowie recordings as well. So they were in the studio with Tony Levin.
Right, yeah. And it was really up to me as part of the process of doing the final mixing to work with Will and Tom Eaton, the studio engineer, to decide who to bring in and what instrumentation to add to the compositions, which was a fascinating process.
Now, this past year, was it the first album or the second album that made the Grammy ballot?
It was the second one.
Second album, okay.
Yeah, Learning to Fly.
So then the way the Grammys work, why don't you explain to us how the Grammys work?
Well, basically, there's an application process, and they have to demonstrate that the music is being played in the public domain. Filling out the applications, there is a ballot process where they do accept or reject it onto the ballot. And from there, it goes through voting processes on down to the final five that ultimately end up being what everyone sees when they get to LA and Hollywood for the actual presentation in February. Yeah.
I got it. Now, as a result of that and a number of other things, boy, we're skimming through a lot of stuff. I could spend an hour, Neil, talking to you about this. But as a result of that, Neil's music is being played all over the world. And the first album is on Pandora. Again, it's called Where Did the Time Go? The second album is called Learning to Fly, which I just got a copy of today, so I can't wait to listen to that. But, it's this kind of music, which is improvisational, jazz-oriented, emphasis on the instrumental qualities, using human voices as instruments.
True, yes, we do that,
is so universal that Neil was telling me in a very humble way that, it's being played in 100 countries around the world. So you get the idea here. Well, Neil, I can't wait. First, it's great to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
And I can't wait to hear Learning to Fly, and we'll have you back again because you're working on your third album.
Starting.
Yes.
Starting, yep.
Well, you got to start someplace.
Right. Taking my time, but starting.
Don't forget, some ears are sharper than others. Great to see you, Neil.
You too. Thanks.
To see this interview again, you can head to our website, looktvonline.com.